Psalms 23. Um, Angela's been talking about this, and um, we're going to go through the psalm together. Um, there's some things that he's inviting us to enter into with this psalm when he's inviting us to come into these places. So we're going to start with it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. For even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So let's go through this piece by piece. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Hmm. So he is our shepherd. And so when we're desiring other leaders, people that are under something else than him, sometimes that looks desirable, but it's not for us. We're to be, he is our shepherd. We're not shepherded um, in the same way that he shepherds us. We're not supposed to give that authority to someone else. Um, and that doesn't mean that you don't have people that have influence in your life. What it means is he is supposed to have our lordship. We're not supposed to put anyone or anything above that. It's usually someone that will take that place, and we're not supposed to let that happen. We don't. I shall not want. It's directly connected to the Lord as my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. It's interesting because it says he makes me lie. So when we spend time with him, usually, if we're not in a place of peace, that's the first thing that needs to happen for us to have a fruitful time with him is him making us lie down in green pastures with him. He wants us to enter his peace, and that's the very first thing. It's you know, I'm your leader, master, shepherd. I'm going to make you lie down in green pastures. I'm going to bring you peace, and you can't move on until you get past that part, because that part is it's it's entering into agreement with him. And we've been given a spirit of power and love and a sound mind. We haven't been given a spirit of fear. So he wants us to enter into that peace, and that pushes it's you can't have peace and fear. It's one or the other. He leads me beside still waters. Hmm. There's something there. There's a leading in his peace. And this verse, I know there's more in there than that, but this part that I'm getting is the when we enter his peace, it's a rest that has purpose to it. There is purposes in his rest that he's reserved for us, and people are not walking it out that are not entering into his peace. So him leading me beside still waters is this resting place in his peace, but he leads me in that place. And if you feel like you don't have mission or you're not entering into mission, his peace is the still waters, the calmness of who he is where we find or reestablish mission. And he restores my soul. That it, the last, it's like these all stack on top of each other. He restores my soul while these other things are taking place. He needs you to enter into his rest because he wants to restore your soul. But if you're allowing all these troubles and things to crowd out his peace and take those on instead of his peace, your soul's not going to be restored. And it's an order of operation thing where he's the one that changes us. We just come into agreement with the way he wants to do things. And a lot of the time it's not how we wanted it done, but replacing our expectation with expecting him to be faithful in doing what he needs to do in us. That's where he restores our soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness. I remember there was this time when I was debating on these two different decisions, and it was interesting because I remembered his pleasure on either choice, and that was foreign to me up until that point because I was always making such a big deal about making the exactly right decision, and that's not where he was at. And in this case, it was this joy, and I remember texting a friend, a good friend, and I told him, I think real freedom is the choice between two or more things that are equally good. And so when it says he leads me in paths of righteousness, it doesn't say he leads me in the path of righteousness. It's plural. He leads me in paths of righteousness. And there's all these things we can choose to do with him. And that's what he wants us to get to, this new place of freedom. It's not new, but it's a lot of the time it's new to us, like it was new to me. He gives us choices that are all him, and he wants us to choose those and pursue those. And his great expectation is us walking in paths of righteousness, and for his name's sake. That's knowing that you're in him and operating in him instead of for him, or operating in him is different than operating unto him. Operating unto him, I think, is a starting place, but it's not where we're supposed to be functioning out of. He's supposed to be flowing through us for his name's sake. So when he leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake, those are together. So it's a way to discern, okay, is this giving him glory or me glory? And it's a lot of the time it's giving him glory in me. That's the combo. That's the power right there, is when you see people and they're operating fully in identity. They're not operating in giftings to confirm their identity. They're operating in giftings because it's who they've become. It's part of them. It's what they naturally do in their new natural form of being in him. And so those have to go together. And so we have to be walking in paths of righteousness in him. And that's why that peace, being right with God, being him operating in us, restoring our soul. It's interesting because he restores my soul is before he leads me in paths of righteousness. So going into ministry is a cool title and stuff, but the thing is, if he's restoring my soul and I'm able to allow him to saturate me enough with enough of his presence and time working on me, and um, him working himself in me to restore me. Once I step into these paths of righteousness, it's going to all be in his name's sake, and I'm not going to be doing it to get identity. So before he leads me in paths of righteousness, the chunk before that of this verse is all identity in him, and that's where he wants us to find our identity. He doesn't want us to find our identity by healing people. It's not, oh, like I'm saved because I saw someone get healed. It's out of order. And this order is very specific. So 4, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So there's a couple things here. So even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it's interesting because it calls death a shadow. And I know there's different places where there's a verse that talks about God having no shadow of turning within him. And there's the last enemy to be defeated is death. And so even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it says, I will fear no evil. So it's interesting because it doesn't say I fear no evil, I will fear no evil. So this is a promise, because the thing is, we can enter into it now. It's not something that's like a later, it's not later in the sense that like we don't know when. It's when we want, when we're fully convinced. When we're fully convinced, we'll fear no evil. So fearing death, fearing bad things happening, all of that, it's promised that that will cease to be a part of you, and it won't even be able to get on you. The I will fear no evil, I've usually conflated it with shadow of death. They're separate though. This is evil in all forms, so bad things. This kind of shows that worry in all its forms is something that is going to be worked out of us, so that it's not in us anymore. So there's no way to there's no access point, and he's working those access points out when we spend time with him, for him to restore our soul and to cleanse it, so that even the access points of the enemy are rebuilt to only allow heavenly, or things directly from heaven, and no demonic things. For you are with me. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So the fearing no evil is also very tied to our revelation of him being with us. Yeah, when we have a revelation of him with us, then it's like when you feel safe around, like if you have a big friend that you hang out with and you're walking around at night, when that big friend is there, you don't fear because they're there. And it's the same thing. It's with him being there, he can handle it. And that's how he wants us to operate is, well, God, like, I don't know how to deal with this situation, but you do, so I can ask you. It's the same thing about being prophetic in ministry is, if I don't know what to say, I can ask him because he's right there. The more revelation I have of him being with me, the more I know if I don't know, it's okay. I just have to ask. This is a big one because this goes for everything. It's not just ministry. It's everyday life. It's whatever it is. He wants us to ask. We don't have because we don't ask. We don't have if we don't have a lack of fear. Basically, let me reword it a little better. If we still fear any kind of evil, we need to experientially know that he's with us, and so there's different revelations for that to happen, and that's like the risk of asking him, even if we're not fully convinced. He wants us to step out of our comfort zone when it comes to being prophetic and being trusting of for you are with me. He's with you, especially when you don't feel like it, because the enemy's trying to get you to be convinced that Holy Spirit's not there, and that Jesus isn't there. Because if he can get you convinced, you won't ask the question, because Holy Spirit, Jesus, like they're right there, like the kingdom is within you, and so asking, engaging, that's what that's what makes everything change. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This one's interesting because your staff is to, pull you out of whatever situation, but the rod, that one's interesting. The rod's for correction. The interesting thing about that is it's a comfort because you can pursue him and you can pursue mysteries, and the rod is a comforter because you know that he will correct you if you fall into any deception. Because the staff, if we say the staff is for getting into bad situations, if the rod's for getting in some kind of deception or even some kind of character thing that needs to be worked out, if it's within me and I'm operating in it, he's going to use that rod and drive it out. Because the rod, it's foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and the rod drives it far from him or out. The interesting thing about that is physical discipline is actually at least done properly anyways, it's a act of driving out something. Um, and so it's driving out something that's internal. It's driving out demonic spirits. So when kids are spanked for disobeying or being anything they're doing, it's interesting because they're disciplining their body by using a rod, but you're actually doing it to drive out a way of acting that is demonically inspired. And so you're actually trying to drive out the spirit in a physical sense. And God does it he doesn't do it with a physical rod. His is more effective. That's why when Jesus said, "I don't come to bring peace, but a sword," that sword is separating. So when he's disciplining you, he's separating the behavior from you and going, "This is you. This behavior is not part of you. I want that this spirit should not be an influence in you." And that's the comfort part is we can be comforted. The more we're disciplined, the more we're pulled out of situations, the more we're comforted by his correction. We would rather it's way better to have his correction. That's the best kind of correction. In the same way of him pulling us out of situations, it's the best kind. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. This one, he's been all over for me about doing this. That's feasting in the presence of my enemies. And it's interesting because we've been talking about sleeping in church and how I think it was during like the Salem witch trials or something. It might have been around that time. I forget. Sheila was talking about it. they would put people in stocks if they fell asleep in church. And it's interesting because we're supposed to be mystics. And we were doing some soaking after class, or after we were ending soaking during lab 2 days ago. And I was thinking like, oh, maybe someone fell asleep during soaking, which is not a big deal. And I remembered, I instantly got a vision of Cyrus, our little boy, and he was asleep in my arm and asleep in my arms, and it was like the cutest thing ever. And God was saying, that's what it's like when you sleep in my presence. And I'm not talking about like having a deep vision where you take it away in heaven or whatever. I'm talking about actually falling asleep. He enjoys us, and there's no shame, there's no condemnation. It's him enjoying watching us sleep, and that's, he wants us to actually really rest. And a lot of the time, in especially in the past in my life, the obedience was to go lay down in a church service, and it might have looked whatever. It doesn't really matter. Your obedience to do what he says is more important, because he wants to give you experiences to not only restore your soul, but he also wants you to be walking in these paths of righteousness. And we're supposed to be a peculiar people, and we've become really boring. And it's time for us to uh, actually pursue the things that are offensive, especially to people that have the enemy's been trying to make people boring in church for long enough. It's time for us to actually engage and obey, especially if it looks like we're going to be falling asleep in church. It's something that needs to happen. And it's time for people to be falling asleep because everybody's pursuing obedience rather than falling asleep because they're not engaged. You can be engaged and still fall asleep. There's a place to do that. So that's my own experience, and it has been that. There's other things that I'll talk about later about him preparing a table before me in the presence of my enemies. He wants us to do it his way when it comes to battles, and we think of it as battles, and sometimes it's a battle, and sometimes it's a feast. You anoint my head with oil. Um, when Jesus said it's finished, he wasn't joking about it. The enemy wants us to be distracted as much as he possibly can get us distracted from engaging in the feast, in the supper. Communion is to commune with him and each other, but especially to commune with him. And it's time for us to feast on him and with him. Okay, so we're gonna stop there. We'll finish the rest on the next broadcast. Thanks, everybody.